Welcome to It's About Money. I'm Julia Figueras. This marks the 200th episode of the show for host Nannette Nocon. So we're flipping the script and putting Nannette in the guest chair. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to another edition of It's About Money. I'm Nannette Nocon and thanks for joining us.
Welcome back and congratulations, Nannette. So how long ago did you start It's About Money?
It's actually in the mid-90s when I moved to Penfield. I started then. I had been a guest at another program, but then I thought, I want to do this. And in Penfield, they have the Penfield Community Television program, Access, and I started it then, and it's been a long time. 200th episode, so very exciting.
It's very exciting. Why did you feel the show had to happen? What made you start this?
I was a guest at a program, and she interviewed me as a financial advisor. She was not a financial advisor, but she interviewed me about my job. And when she was interviewing me, she was so nervous. And so I tried to help her by, just having a conversation. And I thought, wow, I can do this because it's a lot of fun to talk about different things. And so that's just educating people. Because I asked her, why do you do this? She said, I just want to educate people. I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. So, and then I wanted to put the angle of the finances on it.
Is that the mission of the show, educational, or does it go beyond that?
It's actually educational, and it's also awareness. I just get my name out there, but that's secondary to the education part. So I really break it down to three parts. The first part is educating people about different ways to make a living, because there's the traditional, you work for an organization, but then there's also different careers, different ways to be in business for yourself, just different ways of thinking how you can make a living, and then also want to educate about how you can spend your money wisely, how you can save it and spend it wisely. Because we spend the money, but we also have to save the money. And then the third part is I want to educate people about ways to give their money to the community. So in other words, how can you help enhance the community you live in with resources that you have without compromising yourself.
Money is a very touchy subject. It's often the source of discord in marriages, and it's often a source of discord inside of families with parents and kids. How does one begin to have a discussion about money?
So the discussion about money, I think, starts with what it is that you want to do. I think money is a means to get to the things you want to do. So asking about, asking a child, if they get allowance, for example, what would you like? I want to buy whatever. Okay, what does it take to buy that? And how can we make money or raise money to get to that? So just asking the questions, but I think the discussion can come from the things that we want or the things that we need. And then identify the steps to have the how to make it happen with the money. But I think it's first understanding what it is you want to do. And then money is a means to get to that.
But if it's that simple, why is it so difficult?
Well, I think people try to put a lot of things. Money is about power. Money is about freedom. Money is about control. There's a lot of things. Because, someone has a lot of money and others might want to get to that. It can create discord or equality. If there's several children and the parents are giving one more than the other, it creates problems with that. Or someone covets something but they don't have the means to buy. So I think there's a lot of emotions that's tied with money, and there's a lot of fear that's tied with money as well.
And I think that fear is one of the things that we all kind of face as we get older and we're looking at where we're going. So how do you, in your job and on this show, it's about money, try to ease that fear?
So first we look at the resources that people have and what it is that they want. I feel like my job is to review what they've done so far, what it is they want to do, and try to connect the two of them. So if someone is far behind in terms of reaching their goals, we have to create a plan and maybe we adjust the goals. I say, okay, let's have a strategy here. How are we going to meet the goal? And sometimes people tell me this is what they want, but then they're far away and they're not moving along. I say, well, let's change the goal, because in order to reach that goal, it's not going to happen if we keep doing the same thing from the past, you know. So I tried to understand what it was. I've never told the client no unless it's very obvious it's no. I actually show them why they might not be able to do something or be able to do something. So I like numbers. I've always liked numbers. My summer projects when I was a kid between schools is work on math workbooks. So I always like numbers, and I feel like a lot of solutions can be identified with numbers. So the fear, if you illustrate it with numbers, it'll be okay. Whether what you need to do or what you shouldn't do, I think numbers can help illustrate that. So there's logic to it instead of the emotional aspect of it.
So back to the show. What are the topics that you have covered? And I know there've been a lot, so you're not going to be able to list them all. But in these 25 years, which means you've done this show for almost as long as I was at my job, what are some of the topics that you've covered in 25 years?
Yes, we've covered some interesting topics. Like I've had Kitty Van Boydel talk about buying a car. I've talked to someone, Ed Miller from Miller Funeral Home, what does it cost to die? You know,
Oh.
and discovered some really cool stuff. Like I didn't know you could rent a casket. So sometimes churches don't have money to bury their parishioners, and they have to raise money. I'm like, oh my gosh, you mean they don't have to raise all that money to buy a casket? They could actually rent a casket so it doesn't impoverish. You know what I mean? Because we're talking about smaller communities that may not have resources. Talked to artists. I've talked to people who run a non-for-profit, or they might have a dog rescue program. It's just so many different topics. In my life, I meet so many different people, and it just comes to me like, oh, I can interview you about more depth about the topic that you're working on, or your career, or your path. Like this morning on my way to the show today, someone stopped by who's an artist, and he had just opened a new studio. And I said, oh, let's talk about that, because there's a lot of financial aspects to being an artist for decades and then opening a studio. So lots of topics, lots of people to talk to about how to make it successful financially.
What is the most surprising show that you've done? Was there a show where you thought, I'm not sure about this, and yet it turned out to be fantastic?
Yeah, actually, I mentioned about the funeral. I thought, well, who's going to want to listen to this? But I thought it was pretty interesting, just talking about, having some declaration on how you want to be buried and things like that. And I was surprised at how many questions that I was able to ask from that topic. So, because most people are afraid of talking about death, right? But the reality is, the certain things are taxes and death, right? So, and we're all going to die, and what are the choices, right? Do you buy a casket? Do you rent it? Do you prepay it? Those kinds of things. I thought it was exciting to talk about it because it was informative. But then there's other programs that, one would expect, like how artists make a living and that kind of thing. So.
And you are very in tune with artists. This is one of your things, is the artistic world. And again, it all comes down to, it's about money, right? How do artists make a living? Do you do tax work at all, or do you have an understanding of things like tax deductions, things that artists especially could use?
Yes, we give them a list of things that they should be thinking about, that whenever they spend money, to put it in there for their art, for their business. So I try to encourage them to have separate accounts for those things rather than commingling with their personal. So then this way, when it's tax season, it's not so overwhelming. So I try to help them that, and we partner with tax preparers to make sure that we can collaborate for them. You know, it depends on when they're getting started, but if they're new to the field of doing and producing art, they need to set up a good foundation so it doesn't get overwhelming when they're in it like 3, 4, 5 years.
What's the number one mistake we make with money?
I think not paying attention. I think that's the big mistake that plastic, you know, when we charge things, we tend to not see the value of it because there's a delayed billing to that, right? And it's easy to just present the card. So I think people make mistakes on that end because it's easy to spend without having to count the money physically. There's something about counting money. The other part is in terms of investing. Our biggest mistake, I think, is when we're afraid of the market's volatility. When the market goes down and we panic and take it out of the market, that's a big mistake because basically we're removing the opportunity for growth and being stuck at the value that we liquidated our account. So those two things, I would say, are part of the biggest problems with money.
These things are very mysterious to people, though. So when you are doing It's About Money, how do you couch the terms in ways that your viewers can understand the problem and the solution? You know, stocks, bonds, these sort of things are mysterious to so many people. So how on It's About Money do you make that easier?
Yeah, so in this show, we basically we don't talk about the technicality of the investments because I work in an industry that is so regulated, so FINRA and SEC. So we avoid the actual activity or specific stocks or specific investments. But we do talk about the method of doing it. So in talking to my guests, I try to get from them the financial side of what they do. So I interview them for what they do, and then in the middle, I really have all these questions about the money aspect of it. So they're already talking about what they do, so they shouldn't be nervous, right? Because it's what they do. But then I go into the financial aspect of it, and I'll ask them some questions about it. And I don't want them to divulge personal information, but just to educate our viewers in terms of the things they need to be thinking about. From their experience, how can we all learn from that if they're willing to share?
So what are the challenges in It's About Money? As over the 25 years, what have you found your biggest challenges have been?
So I would say the biggest challenge is the fear that people don't want to be in front of a camera. They're like, oh, I don't think I want to be in front of the camera. I said, oh, you know, just think of it as just conversation. And like we talked about before the show, it's just a conversation. And so once they get going, they're like, oh my gosh, that 30 minutes went by so quickly, you know. But that's a challenge sometimes. The other challenge is in terms of time. I've been in the business for 40 years as a financial advisor, and over time, my time gets a little bit more shorter, but I love doing this. But they've been great at the studio, allowing me to like tape a couple shows each time I come here, those kinds of things, so that I can kind of find time here and there to make sure I'm devoting it with my clients. So that's the challenge. Otherwise, it's been a lot of joy, really, a lot of satisfaction.
Tell us about the joy. What have your big rewards been in these 200 shows?
So it's meeting people and having a more in-depth conversation with them than just when I met them, you know. So really asking about who they are, what they do. And we don't really go into a lot of the personal stuff, but basically their experience in terms of the organization they work for, whether it's non-for-profit or whatnot. I also love the idea of being able to have a forum that what they do can be showcased. So I like that because there's a lot of quiet people out there. So and so if we can spotlight what they do, I think it's fun, right? And then many people in social media. When I got started, there was no social media, was not a big deal. But now the studio has really done a great job posting my older videos, which is nice. But it's a great way, I think, for people who are sort of on the background, if you will, to come to the foreground, to be able to share what they do and what it means for the community, for themselves, and for others who might be interested in hearing about what they do.
So let's talk about those older shows. Think back to show number 1, and then maybe show number 100. Here we are at show 200. How has It's About Money changed from number 1 to number 200?
So the early shows, I focused a lot more about specific financial planning. I invited a couple of financial advisors, a couple of tax preparers, which I still do. But the financial advisor side, I asked a lot of technical questions. And that's when I decided, oh, I better write down the questions so I don't stump them. So when you ask somebody like a technical question and they're in front of a camera, it can stump them. Right? So I figured if I send the questions ahead of time, they have time to think about it. So those first earlier shows were really more about the things that I do as a financial advisor. I didn't give the advice, but I interviewed people about planning and, like you said earlier, stocks and bonds, those kinds of things, but not specific, just the concepts of it. And I interviewed people in the insurance business, people in tax planning, so more around specifically what I do. And then in the 100th show, I began to do more interviews of artists. I somehow love interviewing artists because many people say artists just can't make a living. But that's not true. There's a lot of successful artists in different fields, right? Whether it's music, visual arts, dance, whatever it is. So just interviewing them. And there's so many fascinating topics like, how do you do the upkeep on a historic house that is so expensive to maintain? How do you do that? So just a lot of curiosity questions, really. And now we go into my 199th show. I interviewed a young person who's an illustrator, designer, and just kind of getting started. So to me, hearing her, like our viewers hearing somebody who's young and just out of college for a couple of years, and kind of instead of someone who has a lot of experience, let's hear the one with just beginning and see what journey they're in. I'm curious to see how it would turn out. Maybe interview her in 5 or 10 years, So I hope to do more of these.
What's your best advice for someone who's young and just beginning? That's always the hard part. I have 2 daughters, and I have watched them try to build the credit rating and find a house and start the career. So what's your best advice to somebody who's just walking out of high school or walking out of college?
Sure. So first we ask what it is you'd like to do, what are your expenses. So if they've graduated from college and living on their own, let's take a look at what you spend your money on. Let's take a look at the income. Ask the question, is this sustainable? And if I could squeeze some savings from them, I would do it. Like if their employer plan, especially if it is a matching program, I want to make sure that they are saving at least to what's being matched. I encourage them to save, pay themselves an extra 1% at least every year. If they can do that, when they reach 20% savings, it's easier to have financial independence. So if we can break it down in actionable things. I remember my first clients 40 years ago, they would say to me, I'm not giving you any more money. I'm like, you're not giving it to me. This is for you. So fast forward 35, 30, 40 years later, clients are saying, we're so glad that you were there to always remind us that let's increase the savings a little bit, because we're enjoying our retirement in a way that we would have never had before, because there was always a reason why we could not save. But easing into saving and just having a touch point in terms of reviewing where we are, because it's good to have a plan and implement it, but unless you're monitoring it, it's very difficult to make it successful, because somewhere along the line, there's something that would occur that might tempt somebody to take all the money out, and before you know it, they're back to square one, and then it's harder because they have more financial responsibilities. So I think the monitoring is as important as establishing a good path. So, but really knowing where the money's coming from, where the money is being made. I actually was talking to a client who had the hobby of riding horses. And I said, you need to get a better job. Riding horses is so expensive. If that's so important to you, you've got to get a better job. So I said, let me see if I can introduce you to some people. And I did. And she makes 5 times as much as she was making before, because she had the skills, just was in the wrong industry. So she found the right industry, and now she could ride her horses. So it's like, there's a disconnect here. This is what you want, this is what you're doing. It's never going to catch up. So anyway, she's doing very well. So that's kind of fun too. You're just discovering. But unless we know what the basics are, it's hard to make a decision, right? Because she couldn't continue the trajectory of wanting to ride, and then she'd be frustrated because in her life that was very important. So
many things have changed over the last 25 years. We look at the housing market in Rochester, which has gone insane. Arundel listed as the best town for a starter home in the New York Times. Not that Arundel wants that kind of notoriety, but there it is. That was not what Arundel was 25 years ago. Interest rates go up and down, markets crash, markets rise. Does all of this play into things you choose to talk about? It's about money.
Not necessarily on that space, and you gave me an idea, so moving forward we would make that relevant. But what we do is we post the shows, and it's available at any time. So we try to ask our guests not to reference a particular date because we want to make it evergreen. So, but you're absolutely right, those are topics. But I think that rather than talking about the trend, talk about the basics. So if you go to the basics, because really you could take the show and plant it in another community, and where housing might be expensive, right? So something that in Rochester, our housing prices have been more reasonable. But if you go out to California, right, a house here might be, let's just say, $200,000. In LA or San Diego, that might be 1.2 million, right? Unless the income went up 5 times, it's going to be hard to afford that house. So, but the topic, I think the foundation's the same. What is it that you're facing? What is your situation? And how do we deal with that? So, but yeah, in the shows, there's a lot of opportunity there, Julia, for me to have more topics. So thank you for asking that question.
How universal is It's About Money? If somebody from California was online and found one of your shows, is that something that someone across the country can relate to?
I think so, because it's just really the questions. We do talk about some Rochester things, but I try not to make it so regional because the questions are still the same. Personally, in my own financial planning practice, I have clients all over the country, so the questions are similar. The dollars may be a little different, but the questions are similar. Of course, people in the South don't worry about going. They're not. Snowbirds, but they might want to come up north when it's too hot. so a little different question, little different answers, but I think the foundation is basically the same. Just have to tweak it.
So someone is going to come to you and say, I'm thinking about starting my own show. How would they go about doing that?
So I would say that this show is through community access television, and what I did was I went to Penfield, and at that time a lady named Jane Bartel was running it, and I provided her with a proposal. I said I'd like to do a program where it's half hour, and I would interview different people about different things, just about money. And I said, I promise I'm not going to sell anything, because that's not what the show is about, that it's educational. She says, okay, because I've been approached by a couple other people, and they were trying to make it more of a selling type of program. I said, no, that's not what I do. That's not what I would want to do in this program. And she says, okay. So gave me a chance, and at that time they were doing it at the library, at Penfield Library, and now it's this nice big studio. But I would say ask about the support that the studio provides. The woman who had interviewed me was a different studio, and she had to get her own boom person, her own camera, her own lighting person. That's a lot of work to put it all together.
And potentially a lot of money.
Yes, that's right, that's right. So here I do pay recording time, but that's to reimburse, because it costs money to do the shows, but it's not as difficult. And for me, especially at this stage of my career, it would be hard for me to hire all those people and bring them together, So I love the way that Penfield does it. They do a great job, and I am so grateful for what they have done for me and make it easy. It's basically turnkey. I come in here and they even provide us with water.
I think there's a big myth, and I'd like you to puncture this myth, that going into the media makes you a lot of money. If someone comes to you, how much can they expect to make to do a show like this, honestly?
Yeah, well, I don't make any money doing this show. It's really about me paying the studio time. We don't pay the guests. It's just an interview. So there's no transaction exchange, which is actually not even anything close to. And what we're saying is that, like, you're right, there is a misnomer that people in media make a lot of money. Unless you're, top gun at a major network, right? It's hard to make a lot of money. So I think it's really the love of it, of being able to communicate and just being able to share what it is that you want to report on, or music that you had done, so hosting that. I would say that in this kind of program, through community access, that there is no money earned, there is money to pay out, which makes sense because you're trying to put a show together through a studio that needs to be supported.
So, on a personal note, Nannette, you have supported many organizations in Rochester. I think it's probably the shining star that sits above your head. You have been such a great booster for the city of Rochester. Is there a common thread in those things that you support?
Yes, it's actually mostly arts. So arts, advancement of women, and education for children. So arts and education is a big thing for Carl and me. We just feel that the arts really help us learn. So I think that we all have to have art in our lives, whatever art form that is, because I think we become more creative in what we do. It inspires us. I think art is very important, but in many programs or many communities' budgets, art is the first thing that gets cut out, and that's unfortunate. So we want to enhance that. So whenever it's an opportunity to raise the level of awareness of a particular artist, provide help a child have an instrument, so when they're ready to go to college, that they have their own instrument, whatever it is that's art, advancement of women and the youth is important to us. Because growing up, we didn't have very much, and I wasn't exposed to a lot of art. I did drama in grammar school and high school, but that didn't cost a lot of money except your costumes that you had to buy. But other than that, I feel that I love art. There's so many wonderful artists in our community. And thank you to you for always for having showcased a lot of the music, art and music. So.
Where does that come from?
I think when I just look at art or feel art, there's just emotions that are just fun. I love seeing a film that makes me feel things. Sometimes you need a good cry, and a film is good because a film might do that or make you laugh. It's just kind of condensing amount of time to feel all those emotions. I think is great. I think it makes us better people.
Nannette, I want to congratulate you again on your 200th show, and I want to thank you for what you give to the city of Rochester. I'm not quite sure if you're aware of the impact you have. I mean, are you aware of the impact you have? Does it matter to you?
Well, it matters. I guess I'd rather fly in the radar screen, under the radar screen. The only problem is if I support and I don't have my name, I can't write it off. So from a tax deduction. But that's really, sometimes I support a lot more. So there's a little bit of entry, if you will, to just have a recognition. But to me, it's really more what happens. Like if a child, like one of the kids we supported for an instrument, he's come back to Rochester and he's teaching other students, and I love that because he's so successful, but he's paying it back so that others can have the same experience. So I say I'm now getting emotional. I just want to give an opportunity for people, and I'm glad that I have a partner in life who feels the same way. So it's the recognition is not as important except for the tax write-off.
Thank you for inviting me to join you for your 200th. This has been a real honor to celebrate number 200 for It's About Money. And congratulations again, Nannette, on all that's good. I'm Julia Figueras.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.